They showed up at my door with a lawyer and a $200,000 check, demanding I agree to name my son Nimrod, the same name every firstborn boy in their family had carried for 400 years. I stood there, barefoot and pregnant, holding the torn papers while my husband stayed silent and his parents screamed that I was destroying their legacy. I thought it was just a family argument, but then I realized this was war. They weren't just trying to take away my right to choose a name. They were trying to take away my right to be a mother. And I made sure they learned. They picked the wrong woman to mess with. I'm Hannah, 31. And I swear, I'm not exaggerating when I say my husband's family tried to ruin my life over a name. Not just any name, Nimrod. I didn't even know people still use that word, outside of old cartoons or playground insults. But apparently, in Ethan's family, it's sacred. 400 years of firstborn sons, all named Nimrod. They even had a framed family tree, every branch labeled with a bold, proud Nimrod. I used to laugh at it when we were dating. I thought it was quirky, harmless. But then I got pregnant. Ethan's parents, Gerald and Marjorie, acted like the baby was theirs. They threw a Nimrod reveal dinner before I was even showing. Gerald raised a glass and toasted to the next generation of Nimrods. Everyone clapped. I laughed, until I realized no one else was laughing with me. Ethan squeezed my knee under the table, whispering, "We'll talk later." Later, he told me it wasn't optional. His family expected it, like some creepy blood oath. He said he'd talk to them, that he'd handle it. I wanted to believe him. But within days, his mother started sending me baby blankets with Nimrod 7 embroidered in gold thread. His father emailed us a scanned copy of the family trust, highlighting the clause that said the heir must carry the family name to inherit. It was like they were trying to brand our unborn son before he even existed. I told Ethan we were naming him Caleb. Something simple, warm, human. He said he agreed, that he hated the name Nimrod too, that it had made his older brother's life hell. Russell still gets teased at work, he admitted. He hates it. I thought that was the end of it. Then the campaign began. His parents started showing up unannounced, arms full of monogram clothes, silver spoons, even a custom crib with Nimrod carved into the headboard. When I tried to refuse, Marjorie cried, like I'd slapped her. "Do you hate our family, Hannah? Is that it?" Gerald cornered me in our kitchen once, talking about legacy, while pounding his fist on the counter so hard my tea spilled. I felt like I was being hunted. Every text from them made my stomach twist. They called me disrespectful, selfish, ungrateful. They said I was destroying history. The night I hit 8 months pregnant, they brought a lawyer to our house. I opened the door, barefoot, belly heavy, and there was Marjorie, smiling too wide, with a stack of papers. "It's just a formality," she said sweetly. "We'll give you $200,000 if you agree to name him Nimrod." I laughed in disbelief. She didn't. Ethan stood there, pale and silent, while I tore the papers in half right in front of them. Marjorie gasped. Gerald's face went purple. "You'll regret this," he said, and I believed him. That was the night I realized I wasn't just fighting over a name. I was fighting for my child's entire identity. And I hadn't even given birth yet. The weeks after that night felt like living under siege. Gerald and Marjorie didn't back off. They doubled down. Every day brought a new form of pressure. Packages arrived at our doorstep covered in gold wrapping paper, embroidered baby onesies, a family Bible with Nimrod 7 already engraved inside, even a silver rattle with the date of my due date etched on it. I stopped opening them. Ethan kept saying he'd handle it, that he'd talk to them again. But every conversation seemed to make things worse. He'd come back from phone calls, tight-jawed and defensive, saying, "You don't get it, Hannah. This name means something to them, not to us." I started having nightmares about Marjorie standing at the foot of my hospital bed, whispering Nimrod over and over like some curse. The tension got so bad that one night Ethan came home late and I asked where he'd been. He said he went to his parents to keep the peace. When I asked what that meant, he looked away and muttered something about financial security and how maybe we were making this harder than it had to be. That was the moment I realized they were getting to him. A few days later, Gerald showed up at our door again, alone this time. His face was calm, but his voice wasn't. He stood in the doorway, holding a manila folder. "It's not too late to do the right thing, Hannah," he said. "My grandson deserves his name." I told him calmly that my son deserved the name his parents chose together. Gerald's jaw twitched. He stepped inside without being invited. I felt my pulse spike. Ethan wasn't home. He slammed the folder onto our dining table and opened it. Trust documents, old newspaper clippings, family photos of men in sepia tones, everyone labeled Nimrod something. He pointed to them like a prosecutor presenting evidence. 400 years, he said. "Do you really think you have the right to break that?" I told him to leave. He didn't move. I threatened to call the police, and only then did he grab his folder and storm out, muttering, "You're tearing this family apart." 2 nights later, I caught Ethan scrolling through real estate listings, houses way out of our price range. He said his parents had offered a loan if we named the baby Nimrod. I couldn't even speak. I just stared at him. "You said you didn't want that money," I finally said. "You said this was our decision." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "You almost sound like you'd rather make a point than make a life for him." I wanted to scream. Instead, I just walked to our bedroom, closed the door, and cried into a pillow until my chest hurt. By the time my due date crept closer, I barely recognized my own husband. He was quieter, guiltier, like he was hiding something. The night before I went into labor, I saw him typing something on his laptop, quickly minimizing the screen when I walked in. When I asked what it was, he said, "Just insurance paperwork." But the next day, when my water broke and he rushed me to the hospital, a thought hit me like ice. What if that wasn't insurance paperwork at all? What if he'd already chosen a side? Labor wasn't supposed to start like that. One second I was standing in the kitchen, breathing through a mild cramp, and the next, my knees buckled and the floor went red. Ethan's face went white. He grabbed the hospital bag, babbling, it's okay, but his voice was trembling. The drive was chaos. Him running red lights, me gripping the dashboard, my contractions too close together. I barely registered the nurses rushing me through double doors, the words hemorrhage and transfusion shouted over my head. Everything blurred into sirens and white light. I don't remember much after that. Just waking up in a dim hospital room, 12 hours later, my throat raw, my body hollow. And there was Ethan, sitting beside my bed, cradling our son. He looked like he'd been crying for hours. When he saw me wake up, he whispered, "You're okay." His eyes were red, his hands shaking. I reached out, touched the baby's tiny head, and whispered, "Hi, Charlie." Ethan froze. He didn't answer. He just handed me the birth certificate. I didn't even need to read it. I saw the first word and felt my chest cave in. Nimrod. I stared at it, then at him. "What is this?" My voice cracked. He started explaining too fast, like he could outrun what he'd done. "You were bleeding, Hannah. They said you might not make it. My parents were there. They said this is what you'd want, that it would bring us luck." "Luck?" I could barely breathe. "You named him Nimrod while I was unconscious?" Ethan's face crumpled. I didn't know what to do. They already had the paperwork. They said if I didn't sign, the trust would... I didn't let him finish. I pressed the call button for the nurse. When she walked in, I said, voice shaking, "Please, ask my husband to leave." Ethan looked like I'd punched him. "Hannah, please, Out." The nurse's expression softened as she guided him to the door. When it clicked shut, I felt everything hit at once. The betrayal, the grief, the exhaustion. I looked down at the baby, sleeping in my arms. "You're not Nimrod," I whispered. "You're Charlie. You'll always be Charlie." Later that evening, a hospital social worker came in, kind eyes, soft voice, and asked how I was doing. I told her everything. The family pressure, the lawyer, the money, the manipulation. She listened quietly, and then said, "You have options. If you didn't consent, you can petition to amend the birth certificate." She handed me a yellow, sticky note with a name and phone number. Franklin McCoy, patient advocate. I kept that note next to my bed, like it was a lifeline. When Ethan's parents showed up that night with balloons that said, "Welcome baby Nimrod," the nurse stopped them at the door. I heard Marjorie crying in the hallway, screaming that I was keeping her from her grandson. I texted Ethan one sentence. "If they don't leave, I'll call security myself." He didn't respond. I spent that night in the hospital holding my son, Charlie, whispering his name over and over like a prayer, because I knew somehow the real fight hadn't even begun yet. 2 days later, they discharged me. I was still weak, pale from blood loss, but all I wanted was to go home and start over. Ethan drove in silence, both hands locked on the steering wheel. The baby seat behind us was quiet. Charlie finally asleep. When we turned into our street, I thought for a second we pulled up to the wrong house. There were balloons tied to the mailbox and a massive banner stretched across our porch that read, "Welcome home, Nimrod Sima," in shiny blue letters. I just stared at it. My chest went cold. "Take it down," I said quietly. Ethan hesitated. His parents were standing on the porch, smiling like nothing had happened. Marjorie was already crying, big, dramatic sobs that echoed down the street. "We wanted to make it special," she said. "Don't ruin this moment." "Take it down," I repeated. Ethan stepped out of the car and started untying the banner. Gerald's face turned red. "What the hell are you doing?" "Taking it down," Ethan said. His voice shook, but he kept going. Marjorie screamed, "You're disrespecting us. You're disrespecting him." Gerald grabbed one end of the banner, trying to pull it back. It ripped in half, the fabric tearing loud in the morning air. Neighbors peeked through their blinds as Ethan threw the torn pieces onto the lawn. He looked broken, caught between two worlds, his hands trembling. We went inside. I locked the door behind us. That night was the loneliest night of my life. Charlie cried for hours, and Ethan and I moved around each other like ghosts, feeding, changing, rocking, but never speaking. Every time I looked at him, all I saw was that birth certificate. At 3 a.m., he finally said, "Maybe we can just use both names, Nimrod legally, Charlie at home." I turned to him, exhausted, furious. "That's not compromise, Ethan. That's surrender." He didn't answer. He just looked down at the baby, eyes glassy, and said, "You don't understand what they'll do if we push them." "I understand perfectly," I said. "They already did it." The next morning, there was a knock at the door. Gerald stood there again, in a press suit holding a folder. He walked straight into our living room and laid it on the table, like he owned the place. "You have 30 days, he said. "If we don't get certified proof that our grandson's legal name is Nimrod, both he and Ethan are cut out of the trust, permanently." Ethan looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. After Gerald left, I went through the hospital discharge papers. Buried in the stack was the pre-registration form I'd filled out months earlier. I'd written Caleb as the baby's planned name in black ink. But someone had crossed it out and written Nimrod in blue, not my handwriting. I called the hospital records office. The woman on the phone checked the file. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "That form was resubmitted the morning you went into labor. It says here it was dropped off by Marjorie Hensley." I hung up, shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. She'd gone to the hospital while I was in labor, changed our paperwork before I even got there. When I told Ethan, he just sat down on the couch, head in his hands. "They shouldn't have done that," he said weakly. "Shouldn't have done that," I snapped. "They forged our baby's name, Ethan. They planned this." That was when I realized this wasn't manipulation anymore. It was war. And I wasn't going to let them win. The morning after that discovery, something in me hardened. The fear and shock burned off, and what was left was steel. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with Charlie and his bassinet beside me, and started documenting everything. Every text, every email, every voicemail from Gerald and Marjorie, every item they'd sent with Nimrod's sequin stitched or engraved. I photographed it all, time-stamped it, labeled folders. When Ethan came into the kitchen, I didn't even look up. "I'm calling a lawyer today," I said. He rubbed his temples. "Hannah, please. They didn't mean to." "Stop," I looked him straight in the eye. "They forged legal documents about our child. They brought a lawyer into our home. They pressured you while I was bleeding out. Don't tell me they didn't mean to." He sank into the chair across from me, silent. For once, he didn't defend them. By afternoon, I had an appointment with Margie Leland, a family law attorney that Franklin, the hospital advocate, had recommended. Her office was small, paper-strewn, but she had the kind of voice that cut through chaos. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting once. When I was done, she said, "You have an incredibly strong case. If you can prove coercion and lack of consent, that birth certificate can be amended." She explained we'd need evidence of the pressure campaign, proof Ethan hadn't acted freely, and any documentation showing interference, like that forged hospital form. I slid the form across her desk. She studied it, then smiled grimly. "This is gold." When we got home, Ethan helped me start gathering everything. He printed months of messages from his parents, even screenshots of missed calls. He made a timeline of every meeting, every confrontation. I watched him writing, his hand shaking. "They really did this to us," he said quietly. "I didn't see it before." We worked for days. Between feedings and diaper changes, I built a case like my life depended on it, because it did. Margie filed the petition by the end of the week. That night, Ethan's parents showed up again, uninvited. I didn't even open the door. Through the window, I saw Gerald holding a massive wooden crate, the custom crib, the one with Nimrod carved into the headboard. He and Marjorie started unloading it right there on the lawn. Ethan stepped outside, told them to leave. Marjorie started sobbing, her voice echoing across the street. "You're breaking your mother's heart. This crib is an heirloom." Ethan's voice cracked. "It's not an heirloom, Mom. It's a gravestone for a name that should have died centuries ago." Gerald's face twisted. "You ungrateful little Ethan slammed the door before he finished. That night, an envelope appeared in our mailbox. Inside was a check for $200,000 made out to both of us. The memo line said, "For Nimrod's future." I didn't even hesitate. I called Margie. She told me not to cash or even endorse it. It was bait. "They're trying to prove you accepted the arrangement," she said. "Keep it as evidence." So I slid it into our growing folder, the monument to their manipulation. When I went to bed that night, Ethan lay beside me, staring at the ceiling. "Do you ever wish we'd just given in?" he asked. "No," I said, "because one day, Charlie will be old enough to ask what his name means. And I want to be able to tell him the truth, that we fought for it." Ethan turned toward me, eyes wet. "Then we fight." For the first time since the hospital, I believed him. And somewhere inside, a new kind of revenge began to form. Not petty, not cruel. Something quieter, sharper. I wasn't going to scream or beg. I was going to erase every trace of their name from my son's life and make sure they knew it. Week by week, the fight grew louder. Ethan's parents didn't just refuse to back down. They escalated. The following Monday, they sent out a glossy family newsletter to over 100 relatives. Right on the front page was a photo they'd taken in the hospital without my permission. Gerald and Marjorie holding Charlie, the headline underneath, reading, "Welcoming Nimrod 7 to the family legacy." I was feeding Charlie when I saw it. My hands actually shook so hard I spilled milk on the couch. I ripped the newsletter in half, threw it on the floor, and called Ethan at work. "They used his photo, they printed his name," I said, voice breaking. He was silent for a long time. "I'll call them," he finally said. An hour later, he came home pale, trembling. "They said they were just proud," he muttered. "That it wasn't a big deal." Not a big deal. They had announced our son to the entire family under a name I never agreed to, like some trophy in their ancestral museum. I grabbed the shredded newsletter and slammed it on the counter. "This is the last time they get to humiliate us," I said. "No more contact." That night, we wrote an email together, clear, formal, and final. We told them they were not to visit or contact us until they could respect our boundaries and the name we chose. Ethan signed it first. His hand shook, but he hit send. The next morning, Gerald called. His voice was calm in that terrifying way only furious people can manage. He listed every financial promise they'd made: the college fund, the trust, the emergency savings account, the down payment for a new house. All of it, he said coldly. Gone. Effective immediately. Ethan hung up without replying, then sat down at the kitchen table and just stared at his hands. I thought he might cry, but then he said quietly, "Let them. We'll do it without them." A few days later, Margie called to say the court had scheduled our name amendment hearing. 6 weeks away. But there was a catch. By state law, the petition had to be published in the newspaper's legal notices for 3 consecutive weeks. Public record. Meaning Gerald and Marjorie would find out before we ever stood before a judge. I hated the idea of our private pain being turned into gossip, but Margie said it was required. If we're honest and transparent, she said, they can't twist the story. So we agreed. The publication went out that Friday. And by Monday, the phone started ringing again. First cousins, then aunts, then old family friends calling to accuse us of dishonoring 400 years of history. One cousin even said, "You're making your child a stranger to his bloodline." I started saving every message, every voicemail, every accusation, evidence of the rot. Meanwhile, Ethan and I were barely holding it together. The hospital bills were rolling in, $38,000 after insurance. We lived off takeout and no sleep, trying to raise a newborn and fight a legal war at the same time. Then one afternoon, a call came from the hospital billing department. The woman said, "I just need verbal confirmation that you approve your in-laws paying the outstanding balance." My blood went cold. "Excuse me?" She repeated it. Marjorie and Gerald had called offering to cover my medical bills, on one condition: confirmation that we were keeping the name Nimrod. I told her to decline immediately. Do not accept a cent from them, ever. When I hung up, I burst into tears, not because of the money, but because I finally saw what this was. It wasn't about tradition. It never had been. It was about control. That night, Ethan held me, while Charlie slept in his bassinet. He whispered, "We're going to win this." And for the first time, I believed it. But I also knew Gerald wasn't done. He'd lost control of his son, and he was about to come for me next. The following weeks were a blur of exhaustion and dread. Ethan was working extra freelance shifts to cover bills, and I was home alone most days, balancing Charlie on one hip and a stack of legal papers on the other. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the baby monitor and the constant vibration of my phone. Calls, messages, always from numbers I didn't recognize. Always them. When I stopped answering, the tone changed. They started leaving voicemails full of venom. Gerald's voice booming, "You can't rewrite history, Hannah." And Marjorie crying, "You're tearing the family apart." One night, Ethan played one back accidentally while rocking Charlie, and I swear the baby started crying at the sound of his grandmother's voice. Margie, our lawyer, told us to document everything. "The more unhinged they sound," she said, "the better it helps your case." But the stress was eating me alive. I jumped at every car that slowed near our house. One evening, I looked out the window and saw something that made my skin crawl, a box on our porch. No note, no return address. Inside was a photo album, every page filled with pictures of old men holding babies. Under each one, the same caption written in gold ink: Nimrod the First, Nimrod the Second, all the way to Nimrod the Sixth, and then a blank page with a printed line at the bottom. "Your turn." Ethan found me shaking on the floor, clutching the album. He flipped through it and swore under his breath. "They're sick," he whispered. He wanted to call his parents, scream at them. But I grabbed his wrist. "No. Let them talk to the judge next." That was the moment I realized my revenge wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be clean. We spent the next 2 weeks preparing for the hearing. Margie said the hospital advocate, Franklin, had written an affidavit stating that Ethan signed the certificate under pressure while I was in surgery, and that Marjorie had been seen at the nurse's desk handling paperwork. It was exactly what we needed. Ethan added his own statement, describing every meeting, every call, every bribe. By the time he finished writing, he looked gutted, like he'd finally seen, in his own words, the depth of their manipulation. The morning of the hearing, he came into the nursery holding Charlie. The light was just starting to come through the curtains, soft and gold. He looked at me and said, "Whatever happens today, thank you for not giving up." We drove to the courthouse in silence, the evidence folder on my lap. Outside, Marjorie and Gerald were already waiting with their attorney, dressed like they were attending a wedding instead of a hearing. She smiled that brittle smile, waved at Charlie's car seat. "Our little Nimrod," she said, and I flinched so hard Ethan had to touch my arm. In the courtroom, the judge, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, listened as Margie laid everything out. The documents, the forged forms, the coercion, the check, the voicemails, even the photo album. Then Ethan took the stand. I watched him breathe deeply, steadying himself. His voice trembled at first, but it grew stronger. He told the judge about the night I nearly died, about his parents whispering that I would want the tradition honored, about the fear, the panic, the guilt. "I didn't choose that name," he said finally. "I chose survival. And I was wrong." Marjorie started crying in the gallery, whispering to her husband, "They're twisting it." Gerald muttered something too low for anyone but her to hear. The judge turned to them sharply. "Did either of you influence your son while his wife was in surgery?" Marjorie's lip trembled. We were only trying to honor our family's history. The judge stared at her for a long moment. Then your family's history is the reason this young man made a decision under duress. She announced that she'd review the evidence and issue a ruling within the week. When we left the courtroom, Marjorie tried to approach the stroller. Please, she said, let me hold him. I looked her dead in the eye. You already held him hostage. And I walked out without looking back. 6 days after the hearing, the letter from the county court arrived. Ethan brought it in with shaking hands, the envelope already half torn open. I could see the seal through the paper. My pulse thundered in my ears as he unfolded the pages. Then he exhaled, half laugh, half sob, and said, We won. I took the letter and read it myself. The judge had written that Ethan's signature on the birth certificate had been obtained under coercive circumstances, not reflecting the informed consent of both parents. The child's legal name was hereby amended to Charles Ethan Hensley. I didn't even make it to a chair. I just sat down on the kitchen floor and cried. Ethan dropped beside me, wrapping his arms around me, both of us laughing through tears, while Charlie babbled from his bouncer like he somehow knew what had just happened. The victory didn't come without fallout. Less than an hour after the mail came, Ethan's phone lit up with his father's number. He put it on speaker. Gerald's voice was flat, rehearsed, lawyerly. We've already met with our estate attorney. You're officially removed from the family trust and inheritance. You made your choice, and now you'll live with it. Ethan didn't flinch. We already are, he said, and then he hung up. The next few days were a blur of practical things, running to the records office for certified copies of the amended certificate, updating the pediatrician, sending documentation to our insurance company, even filing for a corrected social security card. Every time I saw Charles printed in black ink, I felt a physical release, like another thread of that nightmare finally snapping. Then we gathered every object with Nimrod on it, the monogrammed clothes, the blankets, the ridiculous gold-trimmed crib set, and stuffed it all into garbage bags. We didn't burn them. We donated them to a shelter thrift store 2 towns over, so no one local would know the story. Watching those bags disappear out of the trunk felt better than any revenge I could have planned. Quiet, clean victory. That weekend we built a new budget. No inheritance, no family help, just our paychecks and what we could hustle. It looked modest, maybe even bleak, but it was ours. Ethan picked up extra design gigs. I went back to work, part-time, and slowly our house began to feel like our home again, free of ghosts. A week later, we held a small gathering. Just 10 people, the friends who had shown up during the worst of it. They brought casseroles, diapers, a few bottles of wine, no judgment. When someone asked the baby's name, Ethan smiled and said, Charles James, after Hannah's grandfather. No one questioned it. They just nodded and said it suited him. That night, after everyone left, we stood in the nursery, exhausted but lighter than we'd been in months. Above the crib, where the carved monstrosity once loomed, Ethan had hung a simple wooden frame he'd made himself. Inside it, in blue watercolor letters, was our son's name, Charlie. I traced the letters with my fingertip. It cost $15, Ethan said quietly, but it feels like freedom. Marjorie sent one final email a few days later. It wasn't an apology. It said, 400 years of heritage, gone in one generation. I hope someday you understand what you destroyed. But the last line was softer. I'll always love my grandson, no matter what his name is. Ethan read it, sighed, and deleted it. That's the closest thing to peace we'll ever get, he said. 3 months later, life had settled into something almost normal. The bills were paid, the nights were long, but when I rocked Charlie to sleep and whispered his name, I felt calm. Every choice, every sleepless night, every courtroom hour, it all led to this. We didn't have their money. We didn't have their approval. But we had each other, and a son who would grow up knowing that his name, his very identity, wasn't bought or forced or inherited. It was chosen. By love, not tradition. And that made all the difference.